When the law kills an innocent child and calls it a mistake, what does justice truly look like? This is the story of Elias, a carpenter, a father whose entire world was carefully built with love and hard work, and then shattered in a single night of brutal, senseless violence. But this story isn't just about what he lost. It's about the man he chose to become in the deafening silence that followed. So I need you to stay with me until the very end, because when this story's over, you will be the one to pass judgment. Was he a hero or a monster? And your answer might not be what you expect. Before the storm, there was a quiet, a special kind of quiet, the kind you only find in a small town nestled between ancient forests, a place that smells of damp earth and cedar wood after it rains. In the town of Cedar Creek, in a workshop filled with the scent of sawdust, that quiet was a man's entire world. His name was Elias. He was a carpenter. His hands, calloused and strong, knew how to speak the language of wood. He could take a rough, splintered plank and turn it into something beautiful, something with purpose. He built tables that families would gather around for generations. He carved chairs that felt like they were made just for you. He created order from chaos. It's what he did. But his greatest creation, the masterpiece of his life, wasn't made of wood. She was 16 years old, and at that moment, she came bursting through the workshop door, shattering the peaceful quiet in the best possible way. Maya. Her eyes were bright with a fire that could outshine any star in the night sky. She was holding a thick, cream-colored envelope in her hand, waving it like a winning lottery ticket. "Dad! Dad, it came!" she said, her voice breathless with an energy that filled the entire workshop. "It came, and this is the first moment, the first piece of this perfect world I need you to see." Elias put down his chisel. He carefully wiped the fine layer of sawdust from his hands onto his worn leather apron. He turned to face his daughter, and a slow, proud smile spread across his face. He didn't need to ask what it was. They had been waiting for this letter for weeks, the acceptance to the university arts program she had poured her heart into applying for. He opened his arms and she flew into them. He pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of his daughter, of his whole world. He felt her heart beating like a hummingbird's wings against his chest. And in that hug, he felt two things at once: a powerful wave of immense pride and a quiet, selfish fear. The fear of this brilliant light leaving his home. The fear of the day she would fly away. Later that night, the three of them sat around the dinner table Elias had built with his own hands 20 years earlier. Elias, Maya, and his wife, Lena. The warm glow of the overhead lamp made the room feel safe, like a bubble protecting them from the cool autumn night outside. Lena was telling a funny story from work, and Maya was laughing, that full-bodied laugh that made her shoulders shake. After dinner, as Maya was clearing the plates, Elias reached into his pocket. "I made something for you," he said, his voice a little softer than usual. He placed a small object on the table. It was a bird, a little swallow, carved from a single, smooth piece of maple wood, its wings outstretched as if in mid-flight. The detail was perfect. You could almost feel the wind beneath its tiny wooden wings. This is the second moment, the second piece of that world. Maya picked it up, her fingers tracing the delicate lines. Her eyes welled up with tears, but she was smiling. "Dad, it's beautiful." "It's a guide," Elias said, his hand finding Lena's under the table. "So if you ever feel lost out there in the big world, you'll always have something to show you the way back home." She clutched it in her hand as if it were the most precious thing in the world, and in that moment, under the warm light of their home, they were a fortress, built not of bricks and mortar, but of shared laughter, quiet understanding, and the simple, unspoken promise of another day together. It wasn't just a house, you understand. It was a sanctuary, a world Elias had carefully crafted with his own two hands, designed to keep the splinters and the chaos of the outside world at bay. Every beautiful thing we build, whether it's from wood or from love, is a testament to the hope that fuels us. But the strongest wood can be shattered by a careless, brutal blow, and the safest home can be invaded by the very evil it was designed to keep out. A life of peace can be shattered in a heartbeat. A sanctuary can become a tomb in the time it takes to draw a single breath. Later that night, the house was dark and still. Elias, Lena, and Maya were all asleep, lost in their own quiet dreams. The autumn rain was tapping a gentle rhythm against the window panes. It was a peaceful sound, until it wasn't. It started with a boom, not a knock. A heavy, violent boom against the front door that shook the entire house. A voice, amplified by a megaphone, tore through the night. "Police! Open the door! We have a warrant!" Elias was out of bed in an instant, his heart hammering against his ribs. Confusion warred with a primal fear. A warrant? For what? He glanced at Lena, her face pale with shock in the dim light. He stumbled out of the bedroom, shouting, "Okay, okay, hold on!" But they didn't hold on. The next sound was an explosion of splintering wood. The solid oak door that Elias had built and hung with his own hands, the door he thought would keep his family safe forever, was ripped from its hinges by a battering ram. And this is the moment the world broke. A flood of black-clad figures stormed into his home. They were a force of nature, a hurricane of tactical gear, shouted commands and blinding flashlights that cut through the darkness. Before Elias could even process it, he was on the floor. A knee pressed hard into his spine, the weight of a heavy body pinning him down, forcing the air from his lungs. He turned his head, the rough wood of the floorboards pressing against his cheek. He screamed, his voice muffled. "You have the wrong house. We're just a family. There are no weapons here." His words were just noise to them, lost in the storm. He saw them drag Lena from the bedroom, her cries lost in the chaos. And then he saw Maya. She had come out of her room, drawn by the terrifying noise. She stood in the hallway, frozen, clutching the book she had been reading before bed. She was squinting, blinded by the strobing lights. She wasn't running. She wasn't a threat. She was just a girl woken from a dream, walking straight into a nightmare. One of the officers, a man named Cade, spun around, his weapon leading the way. His adrenaline was pumping. In the confusing, shifting darkness, he saw a figure. He saw something in her hand. He screamed one word, "Gun!" Time seemed to slow down, to stretch and warp. Elias tried to shout, to scream, "No! It's a book! She's my daughter!" But the air had been forced from his lungs. All that came out was a strangled gasp. It wasn't the thunder of a movie shootout. It was a single, sharp, sickening crack that echoed off the walls of the home he had built. And then, silence. A silence so absolute that he could hear the rain outside again. A silence broken only by a sound from Lena. A raw, inhuman wail of pure agony that no mother should ever have to make. Elias twisted his body, fighting against the weight on his back, just enough to see. He saw his daughter, his Maya, crumple to the floor. The book fell from her hand, its pages fluttering open like a broken wing. She landed softly, a quiet heap on the wooden floor he had so carefully polished just last weekend. A life isn't a long, winding river. Sometimes it's a candle flame, and it can be extinguished in an instant by a single careless breath, leaving only a profound, suffocating darkness behind. But even in total darkness, the hope for justice, for accountability, can become the only reason to keep standing. And in that crushing silence, as the rain beat against the broken frame of his front door, the man Elias used to be died. And something else, something colder and harder, began to take his place. Grief is like the fine sawdust that settles after a day's work in a silent workshop. It gets everywhere. It covers everything. And it's a constant, gritty reminder of what's been cut away from you. The funeral was a blur, a fog of black clothes, hushed voices, and empty platitudes from people who meant well, but could never, ever understand. Elias moved through it all like a ghost, his hand held tightly by Lena, but his mind was a million miles away, lost in the silence that had followed the gunshot. And then, a week later, the second blow fell. It wasn't as loud as the first, but in many ways, it was more violent. The official report was released. There was a press conference. Elias watched it on the small TV in his kitchen, standing, unable to sit. He saw the police chief, his face a mask of practiced solemnity, step up to the podium. The words that came out were clinical, sanitized, and hollow. a regrettable error in target identification. The officer's actions were deemed compliant with protocol in a high-stress situation. And then, the final, soul-crushing sentence: no criminal charges will be filed. And this is the first crucial moment in his transformation. That night, the silence in their home was different. It was no longer the silence of shock. It was the silence of two people standing on opposite sides of a newly formed canyon. Lena was talking about lawyers, about civil rights groups, about marches and protests. She wanted to fight them with their own weapons: the law, the media, the court of public opinion. Her grief was turning into a righteous fire, a need to organize, to speak out. Elias listened, but he didn't hear. The law? The law was the battering ram that had splintered his front door. The media? The media was the camera flash that had blinded him as he walked out of his daughter's funeral. He had lost all faith in those tools. They were part of a world that had already failed him. He just sat there, silent, a statue carved from grief. Later that night, unable to breathe in the suffocating quiet of the house, he found himself drawn to his workshop. He slid the heavy wooden door open, and the familiar, comforting smell of cedar and pine filled his lungs. But it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a museum of a life that was now over. He walked through the space, his fingers brushing against half-finished projects. A bookshelf for Maya's new art books, a small jewelry box he was making for Lena's birthday. Each object was a ghost, and then he saw it. Sitting on his workbench, covered in a fine layer of dust, was the little wooden swallow he had carved for Maya. The guide to bring her home. This is the second most important moment. He reached out and picked it up. He expected to break down. He expected the tears that hadn't come yet to finally fall. He expected to collapse. But they didn't. Instead, as his fingers closed around the smooth maple wood, something else happened. The grief inside him, so vast and shapeless, began to crystallize. It compressed, hardening from a crushing, unbearable weight into a single, sharp, diamond-hard point in the center of his chest. It was the birth of purpose. You see, the pain didn't destroy Elias. It reforged him. In the fire of his grief, all the soft parts of his soul, the easy smile, the patient teacher, the gentle husband were burned away. And all that was left was the unbending hardness of that new purpose. Belief in what is right is the compass that guides us through the storm. But what happens when the compass breaks? What happens when the people meant to uphold what is right are the very ones who have wronged you? You stop searching for a path. You start carving your own. Every carpenter knows before you make the first cut, you must have a blueprint, a plan. And the blueprint Elias was now drawing was not for building something up. It was for tearing something down. Sleep was a luxury he could no longer afford. The nights became his new workshop. He didn't turn on the large overhead lights anymore, working instead under the focused beam of a single desk lamp, as if he were hiding from the world, or from himself. He wasn't shaping oak and pine anymore. He was studying Officer Cade and his commanding officer, Sergeant Dunn. The call to Silas was brief and to the point. It happened on the old burner phone in the dead of night. Elias didn't ask for muscle or for weapons. He asked for something far more dangerous: information, schedules, habits, known associates, financial records, weaknesses. And this is the first crucial part of his new dark work. His workshop, once a sanctuary of creativity and peace, transformed. It became a war room. Where blueprints for chairs and tables once lay, there were now city maps, marked with red ink, tracking the officers' daily routes. Where sketches of wood carvings once hung, there were now grainy photos, taken from a distance, of their homes, their cars, their lives. He was a craftsman, and this was his new craft, the meticulous study of his materials. Every detail mattered. He learned that Officer Cade had a gambling problem. He learned that Sergeant Dunn was fiercely proud of the new house he had just finished building. The tools of a loving father were now the tools of an architect of ruin. And Lena saw it happening. She saw the light in his eyes die and be replaced by something else, a hard, focused glint. This is the second moment, the one that shows the cost of his new path. She found him in the workshop at 3 in the morning, hunched over the table, surrounded by his plans. The single lamp cast long, dancing shadows on the wall. "Elias, please," she whispered, her voice aching with a mixture of fear and sorrow. "Look at you. This isn't you. This obsession, it's destroying what's left of us." He turned to her slowly, and his eyes were like a stranger's. There was no anger, no sadness, just a chilling, methodical calm. "They followed a procedure, Lena," he said, his voice quiet and even. "That's what they said. A high-stress situation. So I'm learning their procedures. I'm studying their patterns. I'm just using their own rules against them." And in his calm, rational tone, Lena heard the death of the man she loved. He wasn't grieving with her anymore. He was calculating. He was building something, but it wasn't a future for them. It was a coffin for his enemies. A man who is pushed too far will always turn to the tools he knows best. A soldier will turn to his weapon, a writer to his words, and Elias was a carpenter. His tools were patience, precision, and a deep understanding of how to find a structure's weakest point and break it. Even in the heart of the most meticulous plan for revenge, the original blueprint is always drawn with the ink of love. But love, when shattered and reforged in the fires of hate, doesn't become a shield. It becomes a weapon. And Elias was finally ready to use it. The first strike in a war is rarely the loudest explosion. It's a quiet move on a chessboard, a single, calculated move designed to send a message, a single piece taken off the board to show the game has truly begun. Elias's first target was Officer Cade, the man who had screamed "gun" in the dark, the one whose panic had signed his daughter's death warrant. But Elias wouldn't use a weapon from his workshop for this. Not yet. He would use Cade's own weakness against him. He knew from Silas's information that Cade had a sickness, a love for gambling that he couldn't control. So Elias laid a trap, not of wood and nails, but of whispers and lies. Through a cutout, Silas fed Cade a sure-thing tip, a high-stakes poker game, full of easy money, a game run by men who did not know the meaning of the word forgiveness when it came to debts. Cade, arrogant and greedy, walked right into it. A few nights later, Elias was parked in the shadows of a downtown alley, the engine of his truck cold and silent. He just watched. And this is the first moment I need you to see, the first crack in the system. He saw two large, imposing men corner a terrified Officer Cade against a dumpster. They weren't hitting him. They didn't need to. Their size, their calm, menacing presence was enough. He could see the sheen of sweat on Cade's brow under the dim alley light. He could see the desperate, pleading look in his eyes. He had lost everything, and now he was owned by them. As Elias watched this man, this police officer who had seemed so powerful in his home, crumble into a pathetic, whimpering mess, he waited for the feeling, a spark of satisfaction, a flicker of triumph. But there was nothing, just the cold, clean feeling of a completed task. Step one was done. The first piece had been removed from the board. He drove home that night, the cold emptiness sitting beside him in the passenger seat. But he found that the coldness was already waiting for him at home. And this is the second moment, the moment the revenge began to demand its price from him. Lena was waiting for him in the living room. The lights were off save for one small lamp, casting long shadows across her pale, worried face. She knew. A wife always knows. "I got a call, Elias," she said, her voice trembling. "From Cade's sister. She was hysterical, crying. She said he's in some kind of terrible trouble, that someone set him up." She looked at him, her eyes searching his for any sign of the man she knew. Elias didn't deny it. He didn't have to. His silence was his confession. "This isn't you," she begged, tears finally streaming down her face, her voice cracking with a pain that rivaled his own. "The man I married, he builds things. He helps people. He doesn't destroy them." He finally looked at her, and the distance in his eyes was vast and terrifying. "The man you married," he said, his voice quiet but as hard and unyielding as stone, "couldn't protect his own daughter. That man is dead." And in that moment, Lena knew he was right. The man she loved, the gentle carpenter who smelled of sawdust and sunshine, was gone. And she couldn't stay in a house with his ghost and the monster that was taking his place. She left before the sun came up. When you dedicate yourself to breaking another person, you must first break the parts of yourself that feel empathy, that feel doubt. You must break your own heart before you can ever hope to break someone else's. The bravest journey a person can ever take is the one back to themselves after they have been well and truly lost. But Elias wasn't on a journey back. With Lena gone, the last anchor to his old life, to his old self, was gone too. There was no one left to pull him back from the edge. And the abyss was calling to him, promising a justice it could never deliver. When the first act of revenge brings no peace, only a deeper emptiness. The hunger for what feels like justice demands a bigger sacrifice, a brighter fire. With Lena gone, the workshop became Elias's only home. The silence was absolute. There was no one left to ask questions, no one left to pull him back. His focus now narrowed onto one man, Sergeant Dunn, the leader of the raid, the man who gave the order, the one whose authority had signed off on the death of his daughter. Elias decided that taking Dunn's career or his marriage wouldn't be enough. That was pain, but it wasn't poetry. It wasn't symmetrical. Through his research, Elias learned that Dunn's single greatest pride wasn't his badge. It was a house, a beautiful cedar home nestled in the hills outside Cedar Creek. A house that Dunn had spent the last 5 years building with his own 2 hands. A craftsman, destroying the life's work of another craftsman. The dark irony was not lost on Elias. It felt appropriate, and this is the first moment, the moment the line is burned away for good. One moonless night, Elias made his way to the property. The house was empty. Dunn was on a weekend trip, a detail Elias knew from his meticulous planning. He didn't break a window or kick down a door. He picked the lock with the same delicate precision he used to carve wood. He moved through the dark, quiet rooms. He could smell the fresh paint in the pine from the floors. It was a beautiful home, a home full of hope, a sanctuary. He didn't carry a can of gasoline. His method was more elegant, more personal. It was a carpenter's device, a slow-burning chemical fuse, connected to a simple timer and an electrical system he designed himself. It wasn't meant to create a massive explosion. It was designed to start a slow, hot, unstoppable fire from within the very heart of the house, long after he was gone. His movements were quiet, methodical, like a priest performing a dark, final ritual. He placed the device in the center of the living room, set the timer and walked away, closing the door softly behind him. This is the second moment, the fire in the distance and the emptiness up close. From a ridge miles away, hidden in the darkness of the forest, he watched. He waited. And then, right on schedule, he saw it. At first it was just a faint orange flicker in a downstairs window, a candle in the dark. Then a tongue of flame licked up the side of the cedar siding. And then, with a silent, terrible beauty, the entire structure was engulfed, lighting up the night sky. He stood there, the heat of the distant fire a ghost on his skin, and he waited for the feeling. He waited for the satisfaction, for the feeling that the scales of justice were finally starting to balance. But all he felt was the cold autumn wind on his face. The fire was bright and loud, a roaring testament to his rage. But inside him, there was only a quiet, hollow darkness. He had destroyed another man's sanctuary, but it didn't bring back his own. The flames couldn't warm the glacier in his soul. There's an old saying about an eye for an eye, but they never tell you that when the vengeance is done, all you're left with is a world of blind men, stumbling in the dark, wondering why they can no longer see the light. Forgiveness is never a gift you give to the person who wronged you. It is a gift you give to yourself, the key that unlocks the prison of your own anger. But Elias wasn't looking for a key. He was looking for a reckoning. He had dismantled their careers and burned their homes. He had taken their peace and shattered their lives. Now there was only one thing left to face: the men themselves. After the fire, after the ruin, there is only one thing left: a final conversation, a final reckoning, face to face. The stage for this last act was a deserted warehouse on the industrial outskirts of Cedar Creek. Elias had lured Sergeant Dunn here with an anonymous tip, a promise of information about the town's new vigilante. A perfect trap, A torrential autumn rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof, each drop like a tiny drumbeat counting down to the inevitable. Dunn arrived alone, just as Elias knew he would. He was arrogant, overconfident. He stepped inside the vast, cavernous space, rain dripping from his coat, and called out into the darkness. "All right, I'm here. You got something for me?" Elias emerged from the shadows behind a stack of rotting pallets. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was just standing there, a silhouette against the dim light from a grime-covered window. Dunn spun around, his hand immediately going to the gun on his hip. "You! It was you!" He drew his weapon. But Elias had planned for this. He had studied this space for days. With a swift kick, he sent a loose piece of scrap metal skittering across the concrete floor. The sound startled Dunn, making him flinch for a split second. And a split second was all Elias needed. He moved with a speed that defied his grief, closing the distance. The struggle was short, brutal, and one-sided. It wasn't a fight. It was the swift, efficient work of a man with a singular purpose against a man caught completely by surprise. In less than 10 seconds, Dunn was on the wet floor, his gun skidding into the darkness, his wrist throbbing in Elias's powerful grip. The power dynamic had been, finally and completely, reversed, and this is the first moment of the reckoning, the moment of absolute power. Elias didn't kick him. He didn't scream at him. He let go of Dunn's wrist and crouched down, his face just inches from the terrified officers. In the dim light, Elias could see the man, not the uniform. And he asked the question that had been haunting his every waking moment, the question that had been the silent scream behind every action he'd taken. His voice was a low, dangerous whisper under the roar of the rain. "Why?" Dunn, gasping on the cold floor, just shook his head. I don't know." "Not good enough," Elias said, his voice dropping even lower. And then, the confession, the second crucial moment. It came spilling out of Dunn in a torrent of fear and self-preservation. "It was bad intel," he gasped, his voice choked with rain and terror. "The informant was wrong. It was chaos, a dark house. I thought she had a weapon. I thought, oh God, I'm sorry. I am so sorry." The words hung in the air between them. "I'm sorry," the two words Elias had longed to hear. The two words the system, with its press conferences and its procedural reports, would never ever give him. For a moment, the diamond-hard point of rage in his chest seemed to soften. He stood up and walked over to the workbench he had been leaning against. He picked up the heavy carpenter's hammer he had placed there earlier. It felt familiar in his hand, heavy, balanced, a tool for building or for breaking. And this is the final moment, the choice. He walked back and stood over Dunn. This was it. He could end it all right here. One clean, brutal act of justice. He could deliver the final, bloody punctuation mark to his story of pain. He owed it to Maya. He raised the hammer. But as he looked down at the pathetic, weeping man on the floor, he didn't see the monster from his nightmares anymore. He saw a weak man, a scared man, a man who had made a terrible, unforgivable mistake and would have to live with it forever. And a new thought, cold and clear, cut through his rage. Killing him would be an ending, an escape. His arm, which had been so tense, so ready, suddenly felt heavy. The fire in his soul flickered and died, leaving only cold embers. Slowly, his hand relaxed. He lowered the hammer. He let it drop to the concrete floor with a loud final clang that echoed through the empty warehouse. "No," Elias said, his voice now just a tired, ragged whisper over the sound of the storm. "Killing you would be easy. You don't get easy." He took a step back, turning away. "You get to live," he said. "You get to wake up every morning and remember her face, my daughter's face. You get to know that your mistake cost an entire world. You carry that. That is your sentence." Sometimes the most powerful act isn't the swing of the hammer. It's the decision to put it down. The ultimate power isn't in taking a life. It's in forcing someone to truly live with what they've done. True strength is not measured by the vengeance we inflict, but by the compassion we choose in the face of unbearable pain. And with that, Elias turned his back on the broken man on the floor. He walked out of the warehouse back into the cleansing rain. He had finished his work. But as the cold drops washed over his face, he didn't feel clean. He didn't feel victorious. He just felt empty. After the final confrontation, after the last act of vengeance, comes the quiet. But it is not the quiet of peace. It's the quiet of a battlefield after the war is over, when the only thing you can hear is the wind whistling through the ruins. The city of Cedar Creek slowly returned to its rhythm, but the tune had changed forever. The police patrolled with a new kind of hesitation, a new awareness. The name Elias became a whisper on the streets, a myth, a cautionary tale about what happens when a good man breaks. He was a ghost that haunted the city's conscience. And this is the first part of the aftermath, the echo felt by the system. Inside the police station, late one night, the chief sat alone in his office. The only light came from the small lamp on his desk, illuminating one single thin file, the file for Maya. He wasn't looking at crime scene photos or reports anymore. He was just staring at her school picture, the one they'd used in the papers. The picture of a 16-year-old girl with bright, hopeful eyes and a future that had been stolen. He wasn't thinking about Elias the vigilante. He was thinking about the flawed intel, the rushed warrant, the culture of aggression that had led a man to scream "gun" in a dark hallway when all a young girl was holding was a book. He knew the truth. Elias hadn't started this war. The system that he led had. And Elias, where was he in all of this? Was he a fugitive, hiding in the shadows, forever on the run? No, that would have been too simple. This is the second and final part of the aftermath. The echo inside the man himself. He wasn't running. There was nowhere left to run to. He was right back where he started, in his workshop. But the space was different now. It was silent. A thin layer of undisturbed sawdust covered everything like a funeral shroud. The tools hung on the wall, clean and untouched. The scent of cedar was still there, but it no longer smelled like creation. It smelled like memory. He would sit there for hours in the dark, holding the small wooden swallow he had carved for Maya, the little bird that was supposed to guide her home. He had done it. He had achieved his goal. He had dismantled the lives of every person responsible for his daughter's death. He had answered their carelessness with his precision. He had answered their violence with his own. He had taken his perfect revenge. And in return, he had received nothing, no peace, no closure, no satisfaction, just this, an empty workshop, a silent house, and the crushing, unending weight of her absence, now heavier than ever before. The revenge was over, but the grief was eternal. Elias, the master carpenter, had built a perfect, intricate structure of vengeance, only to realize that he had trapped himself inside its walls and had long since lost the key. Sometimes in a war built entirely on loss, there is no such thing as a true victor. There are only different ways of losing. And as he sat there in the quiet, surrounded by the ghosts of what he had built and what he had destroyed, the final haunting realization settled over him, ready to be spoken. Imagine him there, in that final, quiet moment. He stands up and walks over to his workbench. He picks up the small wooden swallow, its wings outstretched, and carries it over to a small table in the corner. On that table is the thick, cream-colored envelope, the acceptance letter from the university, Maya's future, sealed in paper. He gently places the little wooden bird on top of the letter, the guide finally resting at the destination she would never reach. He had done all of this for her, to honor her, to avenge her. But as he looked around the cold, silent workshop, at the tools of creation now gathering dust, he knew with a terrible, soul-crushing certainty, this wasn't what she would have wanted. She would have wanted him to keep living, to keep building beautiful things. And he had forgotten how. And that brings us to the final, painful truth of this entire story. Revenge is a fire. It promises to burn away your pain, to keep you warm in the cold winter of your grief. But it is an indiscriminate fire. After it has burned down your enemies, it will turn on you. It will burn down your home, your memories, and the very best parts of your soul until all that's left is ash. It doesn't heal the wound. It just cauterizes it, leaving a deeper, uglier scar that will never fade. Every single one of us, at some point in our lives, will face injustice. We will feel that burning rage in our chests, that silent scream for things to be made right. That anger is not wrong, it is human. It is a sign that we still care about what is good and what is fair. But the story of Elias is a tragic lesson. It forces us to ask ourselves, what will we do with that fire? Will we let it be the forge that makes us stronger, more compassionate? Or will we let it be the funeral pyre for the best parts of ourselves? If this story and these questions have stayed with you, then please share it with someone. Not to glorify violence, but to start a conversation about justice, about healing, and about how we fight the monsters in the world without becoming one ourselves. And so, I leave you with the question we started with, the one that has haunted every step of this journey. After seeing it all, from the loving father in his workshop to the broken man left in the ruins of his own making, do you believe Elias was a hero or a monster? Leave your final answer in the comments below. I truly want to know where you stand. And if this journey meant something to you, a simple like is always so appreciated, and subscribing to the channel means we can continue to explore these difficult but important stories together. Thank you for listening.